The call had been traveling for 2,000 years, a dying alien's plea looping through the void while Rome rose and fell. Every other species that intercepted it ran the numbers, sender long dead, no point, and ignored it. Only Earth pointed a ship toward the signal. When we finally reached the tiny pod at the edge of a dead star system, we expected a tomb. Instead, the alien opened its eyes and asked, "What took you so long?" This was not a drill, not a glitch. In the year 2147, humanity answered a call that no one else would. The alien's survival defied all known biology. His first question ignited a mystery that would rewrite our understanding of life, time, and what it means to be alone in the universe. Because the being inside that pod wasn't just a castaway. He was a prisoner, and he'd been waiting for us on purpose. The rescue team had a protocol for first contact: remain calm, offer medical aid, establish communication. But the alien in the pod didn't need any of that. He had been waiting for 2 millennia, fully aware, fully conscious inside a stasis field that slowed time to a crawl. Every human who stepped through that airlock felt the weight of his gaze, not just ancient, but calculating. His name, he told them, was Kale. He was not a castaway. He had been sentenced. The pod was a prison. Its designers, a long-dead civilization called the Vornari, had perfected a punishment worse than death. They would lock their worst criminals inside a temporal stasis chamber, slow their perception of time so that a single second stretched into an hour, and launch them into the void on a trajectory that would never intersect with any habitable world. The prisoner would remain fully awake, isolated for eternity. Kale's sentence was 2,000 years. His crime: he had tried to warn the galaxy about an impending danger that the Vornari leadership refused to acknowledge. But Kale had a contingency. Right before the sentence was carried out, he managed to embed a hidden directive into the pod's distress beacon, a signal that would only activate if someone with a specific genetic marker came within range. The Vornari never anticipated that another species would ever evolve to carry that marker. Humanity did. The signal we received wasn't just a cry for rescue. It was a key that only we could unlock. When the UNS Resolute breached the pod, the stasis field collapsed and Kale was freed, not just from the pod but from the centuries of weaponized solitude. He had spent 2,000 years planning what he would say when the right species finally arrived. And his first words, "What took you so long?" were not a joke. They were a test. Captain Sarah Chen's away team immediately noticed that the pod's power core was venting energy into the surrounding space, forming a gravitational lens that acted like a beacon of an entirely different kind. Kale wasn't signaling for rescue anymore. He was signaling for them, the Vornari. And deep in the uncharted arms of the galaxy, something ancient and terrible began to stir. The Resolute sensors screamed. Gravitational distortions bloomed across the system, perfect mirrors of the pod's energy signature. Kale didn't flinch. He had been waiting for this exact moment for 2,000 years. The beacon hadn't just freed him. It had sent a ping directly to the Vornari, announcing his location and the presence of the only genetic key that could unlock their doomsday weapon. And the Resolute was carrying that key in every cell of its human crew. Captain Chen grabbed Kale by the arm. She needed answers. What were the Vornari? What could they do? Kale's reply sent ice through every human on the bridge. The Vornari, he said, were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They were gardeners. They believed intelligent life was a cosmic error, a mutation that needed to be pruned before it could infect the purity of creation. The silence was their final solution. A weaponized quantum collapse that could target a specific genetic sequence and unravel it across light years, leaving entire civilizations as nothing but mineral dust. And the sequence they needed to calibrate it was the one thing they had been hunting for millennia: the genome of the Deathwalkers, the species that once shattered their empire, the species humanity was secretly descended from. This was the pivot that shattered every assumption. Humans weren't random, evolved apes. They were the scattered remnants of an ancient interstellar power that had fought the Vornari to a standstill in a war that cracked galaxies. The Vornari believed they had exterminated them. They were wrong. Thousands of years ago, a remnant of the Deathwalkers seeded Earth with a disguised genetic code, hiding it within a natural evolutionary process so that it would bloom again quietly, undetected. The distress signal didn't just find us by accident. It was tuned to that seed. Kale's hidden directive didn't just call for rescue. It summoned the heirs of the galaxy's most feared warriors. And now the Vornari knew. The beacon had confirmed that the Deathwalkers were alive, wrapped in soft skin and mammalian empathy, barely aware of their own heritage. The silence was almost complete. All they needed was a live genetic sample from a pure-line descendant. And the Resolute, packed with 43 humans oblivious to their own power, had just sailed right into their trap. Dr. Okonkwo, the ship's chief geneticist, ran an emergency scan on the crew. The results were unmistakable. Under the surface, every human carried dormant genetic markers that matched the fragments Kale had preserved in his pod. Markers that correlated with neural architectures capable of resisting psychic intrusion, cellular regeneration that bordered on the miraculous, and a latent combat intelligence that had once outmaneuvered an empire. Humanity thought it was the underdog in a hostile universe. It was the apex predator, wearing amnesia like a shield. But there was a reason those genes were dormant. The original Deathwalkers had hidden them for a reason. The Vornari had a way of tracking them when they activated. Kale's true purpose was to find the descendants, wake them up, and lead them into a final battle before the silence could be deployed. He had traded 2 millennia of solitary hell for a single chance to raise an army. The only problem, the Vornari had already arrived. A moon-sized dreadnought emerged from the photosphere of the local star, ancient and bristling with weapons that bent light into impossible shapes. It didn't hail the Resolute. It just started pulling. The tractor beam locked onto the ship's hull, and the Vornari's mind probe swept through the crew like a scalpel. Most of them blacked out instantly. Chen fell to her knees, her consciousness dragged into a white void. And in that void she saw Kale again, not the ancient, wizened version, but Kale as he was before the pod, in Vornari robes, standing before a council of his own kind. He wasn't just a rebel. He was one of the architects of the silence. He had helped design the very weapon he now sought to destroy. And in this buried memory, he was begging his leaders to stop, because he had discovered something the weapon could never erase. Something that would turn the Vornari's logic against them. The memory tore away before Chen could see what it was. She gasped awake on the bridge, surrounded by slumped crewmates with only one sound piercing the silence. Kale's voice, calm but urgent, speaking directly into her mind. You carry more than their legacy. You carry the countervirus. I hid it in their own genetic line, passed down through you, generation after generation. The silence can be turned into a scream, but only if you remember how to fight. Wake them up, Captain. Wake them all up. We have minutes before harvest. The dreadnought's core ignited with a malevolent brilliance, charging the weapon that would rewrite human history into extinction. And deep in the crew's genetic code, ancient instincts began to stir. The Resolute's hull groaned under the strain of the tractor beam, but deeper than that, something else was awakening. Chen felt it first, a pressure behind her eyes, a sudden clarity. The lighting on the bridge seemed sharper, colors richer. Her heart rate slowed, but her thoughts accelerated. Around her, the fallen crew began to stir, not groggily, but with the fluid precision of people who had just remembered centuries of muscle memory. Kale's voice echoed in her mind again, softer now, almost reverent. You are not just their descendants. You are their refinement. The Deathwalkers were weapons. You, humanity, are something far more dangerous. You are healers who remember how to kill. Dr. Okonkwo was the first to act. Without words, she rushed to a console and began inputting a sequence that no human should have known. Her fingers flew over the interface. bypassing security locks, rewriting firmware on the fly. She was unlocking the Resolute's full potential, weapon systems, shield harmonics, quantum entanglement nodes that had been installed during construction, but classified at a level higher than the captain herself. The engineers who built the ship had been unknowingly guided by the same buried genetic imperative. Humanity had been preparing for this moment for generations, and nobody knew it. Chen barked orders, and they came out in a language she didn't recognize until she heard her own voice. It was Old Dekar, the battle tongue of the Deathwalkers, a language of pure tactical efficiency. Her crew responded in kind, their own throats forming the ancient words with zero hesitation. On the main view screen, the Vornari dreadnought's weapon charged faster, the light of its core shifting from violet to a sickening white. Kale, still physically standing on the bridge, spoke aloud for the first time since the probe. The silence targets the genetic marker, but it has a flaw I buried in its design before I was exiled. When it activates, it creates a quantum entanglement with every carrier of the target sequence in range. If you can endure the first pulse, you can reverse the current. You can make them feel every death they ever caused. Their own weapon will judge them. This was the hidden pivot Kale had engineered over 2,000 years. He hadn't just designed a weapon. He designed a trial. The Vornari believed they were purging an error. In truth, they were about to expose themselves to a feedback loop of the collective trauma they had inflicted across eons. And only a species capable of immense empathy could survive that wave without shattering. The Deathwalkers had been powerful, but they lacked the emotional depth to wield the countervirus. Humanity, with its messy compassion and its stubborn capacity for forgiveness, was the only candidate. Kale had waited 2 millennia for a species that had evolved not just to fight but to feel. But there was a catch. The countervirus required a host. Someone had to stand directly in the path of the silence, absorb the initial quantum collapse, and then reverse it through sheer will. It would kill them, but the feedback would save the rest. Kale didn't ask for volunteers. He simply looked at Chen, and she understood. The captain was the purest genetic match to the original Deathwalker command line. The ship systems had already identified her as the prime node. She was the one who had to carry the scream. The weight of 43 lives pressed down on her. Then the weight of billions on Earth, who still had no idea that their entire existence was an ancient contingency plan. Chen made her choice in a heartbeat. She ordered her tactical officer to rig the forward observation pod as a bioamp chamber. She would transfer her command, stand at the focal point of the Vornari's beam, and become humanity's shield. The crew protested, but the ancient instincts overrode their objections. They moved like a single organism, each person filling a role they had never trained for but somehow knew perfectly. As the pod detached from the Resolute and drifted toward the Dreadnought's firing line, Kale opened a final channel, clear and unencrypted, meant for all of humanity to hear when the lightspeed lag caught up. "This is Kale, last of the Vornari Redeemers. I have found what my people lost, a species willing to sacrifice itself not out of hatred but out of love. Watch them. Learn from them. And if you survive, tell the galaxy that the universe is not a garden to be pruned, but a story that must be told to the end." The silence fired. And for one eternal moment, Captain Sarah Chen did not block it. She embraced it. The white light consumed her, and the scream of 1,000,000,000,000 lost souls ripped through the quantum fabric, not toward humanity, but backward into the heart of the Vornari collective consciousness. Every Vornari alive felt, for the first time in their sterile existence, the raw, unprocessed agony of their victims. And deep inside the dreadnought, the gardeners began to weep. The silence backfired. Across the Vornari Empire, every mind was flooded with the collective horror of the trillions they had erased. For the first time in their billion-year history, they felt the cold they had perfected. The weapon was not a sword. It was a verdict. And the verdict was guilty. The tractor beam collapsed. The dreadnought's shields flickered and died, its weapon arrays going dark. On the Resolute, the crew retook their stations, their movements automatic, guided by instincts that had slumbered for millennia. But all eyes were on the forward observation pod. It drifted silently, dead in space. Dr. Okonkwo scanned for life signs and found nothing. The bridge fell into a suffocating silence, and then a single neuron fired, then another. Chen's body began to regenerate faster than any human medicine could explain. The latent Deathwalker genes, unchained at last, rebuilt her cell by cell. In the pod, she opened her eyes. They glowed not with rage, but with a quiet, infinite sorrow. She had absorbed the entire pain library of the Vornari's victims, and she remembered every face. She transmitted a signal back to the Resolute. "I'm here, I'm whole, and I know what to do." She directed the ship's quantum relay to broadcast a raw feed across all Vornari channels. No old Dekar, no tactical code, just her voice in plain English. "You wanted to silence the universe because you were afraid of chaos. But chaos is just life in its raw form. You don't need to prune it. You need to listen to it. Every scream you've silenced is now a part of me, and I forgive you." The Vornari collective, already broken, experienced a second shock, mercy from the very species they had tried to erase. It shattered their ideology. The Dreadnought's captain transmitted unconditional surrender. The great ship began to self-disarm, ejecting its weapons into the local star. Across the Empire, the empathetic faction seized control. A civil war followed, but its outcome was never in doubt. The gardeners were learning to become caretakers. Aboard the Resolute, Kale fell to his knees. 2,000 years of planning, and it was done. He looked at Chen when she returned to the bridge, her uniform singed but her spirit unbroken. He asked her aloud, "What are you?" She smiled wearily. "We're what happens when a weapon decides to be a garden." She never clarified if she meant herself or all of humanity. It worked either way. The next weeks were a blur. Earth learned the truth. The gene seed awakening spread globally, a benign contagion. People reported vivid dreams of ancient worlds, of battles fought under strange suns. Not everyone welcomed the heritage. Riots erupted. Existential crises tore families apart, but Chen's broadcast became a beacon. She spoke to the United Nations, her face now known to every human. "We are not our ancestors. We are their second chance, and we get to write the next chapter." The final revelation came from the Vornari archives. As they declassified their oldest records, they found a prophecy left by the Deathwalkers before their extinction. It read, "When the gardeners weep at last and the killer weapon chooses to save rather than destroy, the cycle will break. The orphans of our blood will reclaim the stars not with fire but with a gentle hand. Trust the ones who ask, 'What took you so long?' For they will be the slowest to arrive, but the fastest to love." Kale admitted he had known this prophecy all along. He hadn't told Chen because he needed her to become it, not chase it. 50 years later, at an induction ceremony for the Galactic Republic Council, a lanky human named John Smith stepped to the podium. The galaxy saw a peaceful, unassuming species with a history of minor skirmishes. They didn't know that in the observation gallery sat an elderly woman with graying hair and eyes that still held a faint golden glow. Captain Sarah Chen, now retired, watched with quiet pride. And in the front row, the VAR delegate Axion, who had once demanded his father's respect in blood, gave humanity a standing ovation before the speech even began. He had seen the classified footage. He understood that the scariest thing in the universe was not a warrior. It was a warrior who chose to be kind. "My people call ourselves human," Smith began. The galaxy had no idea how close they'd come to eternal silence, but humanity remembered. And they would never forget the question that started it all. And they would never forget the question that started it all. "What took you so long?" In the end, it wasn't an accusation. It was a quiet, patient invitation. The universe is ancient, full of signals no one else will answer, distress calls from the abandoned, from the exiled, from beings who have waited centuries for someone to care. Every other civilization ran the math and saw a corpse. Humanity saw a promise. That is not naivety. That is the strange, stubborn gift buried in our DNA. Kale once told Chen that the Deathwalkers designed humanity not to be invincible, but to be unbreakable in a way that mattered. Not through armor, but through the refusal to let suffering go unheard. 2,000 years is a long time to be alone, but the lonely know that rescue is not about arriving on time. It's about arriving at all. The galaxy is still learning what humanity really is. Beneath the diplomacy, beneath the induction ceremonies and cultural exchanges, there is a truth the Vornari learned too late. The most dangerous thing in the cosmos is not a weapon. It's a gentle hand that refuses to let go. If this story reminded you that the universe is full of mysteries worth exploring, hit subscribe and ring the bell. Because somewhere out there, a signal is still traveling, and we'll be here to answer it.